We have been away for 2 years, and it's absolutely amazing to gather for the first time after 2 years of silence. So, welcome with me, Nadifa Mohammed and Dr. Fatma. Listen to where this year, our theme is, of Somali Week Festival is inspire, inspire, and we are going to look back a lot of our, the great poets, historical figures that has been throughout Somali art and literature. But also, we're going to look forward, and we're going to be inspired by people like Nadifa Mohammed. We have also here Omar, the main actor of the Gravedigger's wife. You have seen many of you. Omar Yaristag. So it's going to be a really exciting week from today till Sunday, inshallah, which will the last final event will be headlined by Sultan Serar, who is still self-isolating. But it's going to be fantastic, inshallah. Who's going to come for the final event? Who's going to come for the final event? So many of you. So before we kick off really this year, I want to thank everyone who has been supporting us. First of all, Art Council of England, the British Library, that has been fantastic to us for the last few years. Jonathan, where's Jonathan? Chona? Chona, give a hand to Chona. Chona. But also Tower Hamlet, Dabshir, Canary Wharf, Magan Taxi from Bristol, Oasis Care, Califan, but also Faro Foundation. I think some of the Faro Foundation staff are here, or they are on their way. So, I really want a round of applause for all Somali Week supporters. But the festival has been made fantastic and incredible because of the wonderful, amazing artists who are coming across East Africa, Somali Horn, Canada, Europe, and of course our own UK artists. So I would like to welcome. Firstly, Sultan Serar is still isolating, but Ahmedei Gashan. Muhammad Salaban, Hikmawi and Krama. Can you please stand up? Where are they? These are young writers. They just arrived this week from Hargeisa. One of them is the writer of Muhammad Mogaliban's biography. The other one, Hassan Qawdan, and Muhammad, he's the editor of the Hadrawi's book, The Great Hadrawi. So thank you so much for all of you for being here. I would like to also welcome, we don't have only traditional writers, but we also sometimes diplomats who write. Muhammad Ali America. So many of you know the ambassador. His last post, I think he was the Somali ambassador to Kenya. So Ali Sodo Walalo. There will be many to mention, but I would like to also thank our European Somali writers, Abdi Bashir, Maalimo. There are too many of you to mention, but really, absolutely, thank you all for coming and show the weather. But there's someone really that I'm really proud of, that I would like to, because she's the only one joining us from Kenya. Many of you know Yusuf Hassan, his lovely daughter, who runs a Pan-African bookshop in Nairobi. Ubah, please would you stand up? Thank you. Thank you, Ubah, for joining us, especially with pandemic. It has been really a difficult time for people to travel. So we really absolutely touched that so many of our artists have really tried to be with us. Normally, we have less to do with the police, but this year it has been really difficult for many reasons. Many of you know that the suspect has been identified as someone having Somali heritage, and it has been very difficult for many of our communities. And I would like to really thank Scotland Yard and Tower Hamlet Police and London Police, who have been really fantastic to work with us to make sure that all our venues are secure and safe for people who are attending the festival, but also to make sure that the community feels safe. Because safety is not only that something that happens to you, but it's about feeling. So I would like to thank Scotland Yard. I'm not sure whether some of them are in the venue, but I know they are around. So thank you so much. As I said to you, it has been really difficult year, and last 2 years, and we are not gonna only, it would be unfair to just move on. We have made a small video to commemorate for all those people for the last 2 years that has passed away, who has contributed to Somali art and literature. Some of them who were really close friends of ours, like Hudaydi, who will forget Hudaydi, Mohammed Dahir Afrah, who just passed away last week. So I know many of the artists here have lost so many friends. So I would like to show a short video, kind of how it was quite yeah, just watch it for yourself. And waxaan idin wada weydiinaynaa inaa u ducaysiin waqti adag bay ahayd dadkoo dhan ku adag laakiin gaar ahaan dadka suugaanta iyo dhaqanka wax badan baa ku dhacay xanuun badan baa ku dhacay marka the video please. Ya Ilahi, please forgive me.
muddo yar oo kooban gudahood waxaa inaga geeriyooday in badan oo ka mida dad bulshadeenna Soomaalida ugu jiray kaalin muhiima kuwaas oo ay ka mid ahaayeen abwaano qoraayo hobollo jilayaal iyo muusikistayaal intaba inkastoo ay badan yihiin oo aan la soo koobi karin bal waxa aynu caawa ka xusaynaa magacyadooda intii aynu ka gaadhno amaba noo suura gashay dadka qaaliga inagu ahaa inaga baxay tan iyo intii uu xanuunkan 20 mid la dunida ku habsaday waxaa ka mid ah محمود إسماعيل الحذيدي زينب حاج علي بحسن دكتور محمد داهر أفرح محمد باشا حاج حسن محمد محمود عقي عبدي تهليل ورسمي حريضو إسماعيل دنيو عمر عبد الله الشولي داود علي مصحف عبد علي بعلوان فاطمة علي تشامع نكرومة عبد الرحمن عثمان محبة عبد الرحمن ديري سراد عبد الله أوغاس فارح سيدو فارح إبراهيم إسماعيل سقولي صوران محمد آدم شموري حبيبة عبد الله وبري حبيبة بلبلاف أحمد علي روبلي طيح عبد شامع عابي عبد قبوشي أبوان محمد علي مصمص محمود عويل عثمان أبو أنطونيو عبدي مريدي ديري أتشكيس كيد Somali Arts and Culture waxay ka codsanaysaa dhammaan ka soo qaybgalayaasha munaasabaddan furitaanka 13aad ee Somali Week Festival London in aynu u ducayno dhammaantood dadkaasi inagu qaaliga ahaa
hadal markaas soo baxay markaas oo kale we haven't lost them because of the heritage and what they have documented. Our responsibility is to write, to document, and really that's an inspiration that we're talking about. These artists that have inspired Somali people for the last 50, 40 years. So, udu'aya, idinkuna, you know, the younger generation, Nadifa being kind of our headliner, they will be there to inspire the generations to come. So thank you all for coming, and over to Dr. Fatima. Isman Shegin, Ayan Hamoud. I've been away for 3 years, but I'm the founding director of KAID. Thank you. Dr. Fatima.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. It was a very, very sad but truthful commemoration that Ayan showed to us right now. But it is very telling about the journey that we've had over the last year or two, that COVID has impacted us and many other communities of colour who are marginalised, disadvantaged in so many different ways or have different lifestyles. That shows that we have been hit really hard. And that's just some of the names. We know many, each of us will know many, many more of those names as well. So we make dua for them. In the Dimbi Dafo, inshallah ta'ala. And that we don't forget. I don't think this is a period of time that any of us can forget. So we will now cheer up, inshallah ta'ala. But I would say welcome to the 13th Somali Week Festival. We have been doing this for 13 years, and it is my honor today to host our evening of events. The theme of the evening is inspired by the past, inspired by the future. So we do have a phenomenal array of guests for this evening to share their thoughts, and for you to also to share your thoughts with them as well. We hope we can make this as interactive as we possibly can as well. We're going to, just to give a bit of a background, so I myself am a trustee of KAID as an organisation. This is my side, not hustle, I don't get paid, but this is what I do on the side. Actually, I work as a consultant in public health, so I have been working on COVID every day for the last almost 2 years. And I know that there are many, many people in this room in different spaces, be that within the community, be that within healthcare, be that within every sector, have been contributing to what is this awful global pandemic. So I do hope that we are still in the pandemic. I think it's really important to note that. We are still in the pandemic. So to be cautious, to be careful is the only thing that I would pass on today, inshallah. I would say this is the kickoff for a week long of events. So this is our launch. We have a complete week of events throughout the whole of London. And I think there are also events in Leicester as well, if I'm not mistaken. This will be this is our first Somali Week Festival together live since COVID began. Last year it was online. And this year we are really, really pleased to be able to present this week's festival in person. And it's not without the dedication, the hard work, and the sleepless nights of our K team, of our volunteers. Ayan herself has been on the ground in the thick of it. So we want to thank them first and foremost for all their efforts to bring us together today so that we can enjoy each other's company and thoughts and discussions for the rest of the week, I hope, inshallah. So a round of applause to all the efforts to bring us all together, please. So just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. Obviously, the hope is that everybody is not symptomatic of COVID in any way before you come to this event. I think everybody knows what those symptoms might be. All the events, the expectation is that everybody does not attend if they have any COVID symptoms at all. And in fact, the final event, the expectation is that you either prove, using the NHS app, that you've been double vaccinated, or you have taken an LFD test within a day or two before the actual event itself. And that will be checked on the door. So that's just to highlight for the final night's event, that will be checked. So just to be aware of that. Just to run through the evening's event. So we're going to start off, obviously Ayan, our founder and managing director, has started us off with incredibly well. We will be going straight to our keynote guest this evening. We're really, really honoured and appreciative of Nadifa giving her time this evening to share some of the thoughts about her new book, the Fortune Men. So we look forward to having conversation with her. That will be a bit of a conversation on stage, but I do hope we can open it out onto the audience as well, so you can ask questions of Nadhifa as well. So we look forward to having that discussion as a group. After that, we do have the Minister for Africa joining us today. So the hope is that she can come and say a few words if she's able to make it a little bit later. And once we're done there, we also have 3 young and up-and-coming poets who will be coming to the stage to share their work with us today as well. So we do have a full evening of events. And that will be ended by, last and certainly not least, by the singing of Nim'a Yasin, inshallah. So we all look forward to hearing her sing some Somali songs for us tonight as well. So we will kick off from the very outset with, I'm going to introduce Nadhifa first of all. If you just bear with me. So Nadhifa is our, and I say our because we do have ownership with you, Nadhifa. You're one of us. She is our British Somali novelist whose latest book, Fortune Men, is one of the 6 books that's been shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and that is no small thing. This is out of many, many, many books. She's now been shortlisted. So Fortune Men is Nadhifa's 3rd novel. And the book is a fictionalized retelling of the real-life miscarriage of justice. It's the story of the Somali seaman, Mahmoud Matan, who was wrongfully convicted and received the death sentence, in fact, for a murder he did not commit in Cardiff in the 1950s. So it's a historical fiction book that she's written. I read it and I found it incredibly moving. I would recommend that people do go buy the book. It is available outside, and at the end of the evening's events, Nadhifa will be available to sign, and her books will be available outside too. Her 2 previous novels, Black Mamba Boy, she published in 2010, and The Orchard of Lost Souls, won the Betty Trask and the Somerset Maugham Awards. In 2013, she won the Granta Best of Young British Novelist Award. In 2014, Africa 39 list of the most promising writers under the age of 40 from sub-Saharan Africa. She's the winner. The winner of the Booker Prize will be announced next week at an award ceremony. So it's Wednesday, put it in your diaries, 7:15. It will be live on TV. It will be on Radio 4. She'll be in person at the award ceremony, and we'll all be rooting for her on that night as well. This is Nadhifa's very first UK live event publicising this book, so we are very honoured to have her here with us. She is in demand, but she's come to see us first, so we're very, very pleased to have her here with us. Thank you. So I'll just have a Okey-doke. So, first of all, Nadhifa's going to start off with a reading from her book.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. So, yeah, this is The Fortune Men. Some of you have got copies I can see already. And if you haven't read it yet, it's the story of Mahmoud Matan, a real man who was executed for a murder he didn't commit in Cardiff in 1952. So I focus on what happened to him from the February of 52 to September when he was executed. But it also goes back and forth in time to his childhood in Somaliland and then also his travels through Africa and around the world. So I thought I'd read from a section where he's already in jail, but he's in prison waiting for the trial. The night comes too late, the sun teasing him and sending the sky all kinds of colors before it tires and finally slinks below the horizon. Mahmoud has to crane his head this way and that before he spots the moon, hiding behind a bank of slow-moving clouds. They drift clear, and then he can see the new moon. Tomorrow will be the start of Ramadan. He is grateful that he will have something to occupy his mind, even if it is just hunger. It is an ugly sky tonight, full of gas and smoke. The night skies in Hargeisa made you think of God, while here they are worldly, contaminated by men and their ceaseless chimneys and bright lights. He can see one constellation, its Somali name lost somewhere in his memory, the English never known. In Hargeisa, where sunset meant complete darkness, you could track the slow movement of stars and planets, glittering and pulling you up into a depthless, shifting sea, with its coastline of purple, indigo, and black stretches. God reminds you through those night skies of how small and insignificant you are, and he speaks to you clearly, his anger and solace tangible in the rain he sends or withholds, the births or deaths he orders, the long waxy grass he gives, or dead broken earth he carves. The miasma above the prison, above Cardiff, suffocated Mahmoud's faith and separated him from God. He began to strut and bluster his days away and completely forget that this life meant nothing and was as fragile as a twig underfoot. He had needed to be humbled. Mahmoud nods to himself. He can see God's wisdom so clearly now. Looking back to the bed, he makes the obligatory intention to fast the next day, using the Arabic sentence that his mother had taught him as a child, his sing-song intonation mimicking hers. Mahmoud lies down on his side, his head resting on his spongy biceps, and thinks about shaving the whole of his head. A clean start, like pilgrims do after completing the Hajj, the sins of the old life shorn away. But how would he look? With his broad face and small jutting ears, what scars and lumps might be revealed? What would a jury think? A white jury, already prepared to hate him, if he stood there with no hair to soften him. They would not think of Hajj or purification. No, they would think him a madman or a hardened criminal, a wild savage needing the chastening of the law. He can't risk it. He'll neaten up his wiry hair with a short back and sides in the morning and start pulling himself together again.
That was a really, really interesting excerpt that you wrote. And it's the depth of the way you got into Muhammad's mind as well. How did you develop the character of Muhammad? Because it's a character, but it's also a factual character. How did you get the information? How did you develop that character? And did you enjoy developing that character?
I really did enjoy getting to know him. First of all, the real version of him, the man in the archives who, you know, I say real, but the way that the police described him and captured him is their own perception of him with its prejudices and own tint on top of it. But yes, you know the facts of his life. He was born in Hargeisa. He was the youngest of 4 boys. His mother and father had a shop and lorries. You know, really basic details. You start building from there. And then you have the transcripts where he's in conversation or he's being interviewed by the police. First of all, when everything is completely brand new. The night the murder happens, they come to him in the boarding house and start asking him questions. And instantly he says, all police are liars. Why are you talking about a black man? Who said it was a black man outside of that shop? So he goes in heavy. And then as the time goes on, as he realizes that they're concocting something around him, the archive disappears a little. And that's where I had to step in and think, well, what would be going through his mind? He was in prison for quite a long time waiting for the trial. So he was arrested in March, the trial was in July, and the execution is in September. So it's a long time for someone to be stationary, especially someone like him who traveled the world, who was completely free in his everyday life.
Short time, March to September. That feels really short, doesn't it? To go from conviction to death.
Well, that's actually much longer than it would have been.
Really?
Yeah. In the 1950s, if there was good evidence against you, you could be executed within 6 weeks of the crime.
Wow.
It was incredibly fast.
Gosh.
So for him, it was a longer process than usual. And being hemmed in like that, having your freedom taken away, I'm sure that time moves more slowly. I've kept it out of the novel, but for a period of time, he was actually taken to Bristol prison, so he was separated from his family in Cardiff. So you imagine how you would feel in this position, but you're also thinking, well, I'm not a young man who was born in the 1920s, living in a different time, a different society. And that's why I didn't try and censor the things that would be different. He is a man with the kind of conservative or, patriarchal beliefs that many men had and still do. So I didn't want him to be the person I wanted him to be. I wanted there to be freedom in how he was portrayed.
Sure. And you describe where he lived in Tiger Bay, Cardiff, as being a really diverse community. So you had African communities, you had Caribbean, Jewish. In fact, the murder victim was a Jewish lady herself. And they seemed to sort of get along quite well on the surface, within that community. But when he stepped outside of the area, It was quite apparent just walking down the street. I remember taking his teddy bear to one of his children, you know, windows shut, twitching curtains. And it's an interesting narrative because it's the story of those communities were often invited to Britain as part of being the British Empire, and yet they were not welcomed. No. How does that relate to the experience of black men and women today, where we are still seeing, when you think about Black Lives Matter, we're thinking about, you know, recent events that we've seen time and time again, the football players, who were the England players no less, you know, flying the flag, and yet they were not treated in a way that you would have expected them to be treated. So how much has changed since Mahmoud Matan's time to today?
Not enough. I think that's the easy answer. To go back to the first part of your question, yes, it was very multicultural, and people intermarried. You know, I've got a distant relative in Cardiff who's quarter Somali, quarter Mauritian, quarter something else, and you know, you get those kind of combinations a lot in Tiger Bay or Butte Town as it is now. But something that struck me was Mahmoud had left Tiger Bay and he was living just outside in Adamsdown, which was a different neighbourhood with a different atmosphere, and that's why there's so much more hostility. It's a white working class neighbourhood that his wife lives in, and he's gone there so that he can live just opposite her. Right. But it's not a place for him. No. And he's living in a boarding house with men from West Africa and the West Indies. And what surprised me was actually the tension between them. And his landlord and one of the other lodgers are prosecution witnesses, very eager prosecution witnesses against him. And then the chief prosecution witness is a Jamaican carpenter. So there wasn't any particular familial feeling or care. Or
camaraderie.
Not really. Yeah. So for some there was, and you know, you had Pan-Africans there and people who were very political and wanted to get freedom for Africa as a whole. Yeah. But then you had the others who had developed petty resentments against each other from the ships or from working in factories, and you know, you're an Arab, you're not one of us, you're Christian, you're not like us, and all of these resentments were under the surface. And I think that's also something that's followed us into the current period of time where people are factional. You know, I think if there was a stronger sense of a communal black identity, it would be a much stronger one. But I think there's too many divisions, and therefore people are always just, you know, it's easy to part them. Yeah. But in terms of the state and how it related to the immigrants, they came as cheap labour. Yes. They were only allowed here as cheap labour. And when they arrived, they would be earning a quarter less than British sailors, white British sailors. And before that, they would be there was a chart of supplies on ships and who was entitled to what. So Indian, Somali, Arab, whoever, foreign sailors would get half the ration of water. Less rations when it came to bread, to meat, to
basic sustenance.
Yeah. Wow. Even though you were either doing the same work or harder work because you were given the worst jobs. Yeah. So that's why they were here. It's because they satisfied or fulfilled their place, a mechanical place almost, within this massive colonial structure, this economic structure.
And what comes through also I suppose there's two bits I want to ask you as well. On that point that you're saying, what comes through your book as well is that Mahmoud often refers, and it's often referred to as something, as if, you know, they treat us like animals, that they're barely seen as human. And what I found interesting was your description of this touring carnival that went to Berlin, and that was a real carnival.
There was lots of them.
That were going around at the time. So it was literally human zoos, where once you read the book, that human beings from different communities and populations, Native Americans and Africans, were touring the world with animals. So with giraffes, and they were just spectacles, basically. People came to watch them urinate, watch them defecate even. Yeah,
that wasn't the main show.
No, it wasn't. But they were almost like, you know, peeping at them as if they were barely human beings.
Yes, yeah. And it was across England, Britain, Japan had them, Russia, America. And it sounds so crude. And I think something that I've always wanted to do with my work is to actually humanize the people that made the decision to do something like that. And they were working, they were paid to do this. And they were not aware of the deeply terrifying racial ideas that they were, I think, party to. They were being brought to the West to sort of celebrate this hierarchy of races. And to entertain, and also because, you know, there was an idea that these natives might die out. So, and especially when it came to indigenous people from really small communities, they often did die when they were brought here because they were exposed to diseases that they didn't have any immunity for.
Yeah.
The Somalis were generally okay. They came in big groups. They had good immunity. There was a woman who died in Bradford in 1905 as part of one of these traveling groups. But for them, it was a way of seeing the world. And Berlin, who's one of the main characters, he arrived when he was very young in Europe, at about 10 years old, in 1905. And then spent time in Germany. That's why his nickname was Berlin. And then stole the papers of a Yemeni sailor and joined the merchant navy. So for them, it was all adventure. It was all a way of seeing things, taking yourself outside of your environment. Yeah. And I think it's important to remember their side of it, rather than just the oppressive, humiliating aspects of it.
And it was of the time, wasn't it, I think, as well? It was of that time where there was very little understanding of other peoples, which in some ways, there's less justification today.
There's no justification. There was never any justification.
No, there was never,
But what it did also do was it introduced Somalis to Tamils, to Mohawks, to indigenous Australians. Yeah. And that's also important. That connection is important. So you were being brought here for a very nasty purpose, but then within that, you create your own space. And that's also the case with Cardiff. You were brought here to be exploited, but you create your own environment. You create your own world. And that's something that people do under pressure.
So how does that relate to you? Let me ask about you, Nadifa. What's your story? Because you were also somebody born outside of Europe. You're born in Somalia yourself. You came to Britain as a young person. How does that movement from one completely different culture to another, how did that shape you and your storytelling and your experiences growing up in Britain?
I think it really shapes you. I think I'm finding more and more writers who have moved countries around 4 or 5 years old. And that seems to be a real psychological imperative to work out where you left, to try and remember where you left, and also try to make sense of where you are now. And I grew up not knowing much about my background, but also thinking that we'd go back at some point, so then I would be able to fill in the information once we went back, but we never went back. And I think my writing has been influenced or motivated by that desire to know all of the things I still don't know, that I'm still learning, such as the life of people like my father and Mahmoud Matan in the 1940s or 50s, or the life of my grandmother in Yemen as someone who worked in a coffee factory. I think something has to be missing for you to go and pursue the answer to it, or the missing part of it. Yeah. And, you know...
You found what's missing? Do you think you filled that gap?
I think I've made more sense of things. Yeah. So... my family are immigrants, you know, we were immigrants in Aden, we were immigrants in Eritrea, we're immigrants here. So it feels kind of natural to always be away from Somalia now. It doesn't feel as if it's such a, you know, I don't feel as torn away from my roots as I did when I was younger. And I think as well as I get older and I learn more, I learn that everything is complicated. People give you a very narrow understanding of who you should be. And the more you can make that complicated and find out, well, what was Mahmoud like? What was the person next door to him like? What are the other options? Yeah. We don't have to be one way. No. And there are probably people like you in the past who model maybe your interests or your own behaviour or your way of dealing with things. Yeah.
And in fact, if anything, I think Mahmoud's generation, which was also my father's generation, who came here in the 50s, were a group of people who didn't conform, actually. They were the ones who jumped on ships, they jumped on planes. They were fairly fearless, actually, when you think about it. I remember my father telling a story where he was in Middlesbrough and wanted to move to London as a single man. And he went to the train station and bought a ticket. But he accidentally bought a ticket for Sheffield. And he looked at it and he went,
why not?
You know, I'll move to Sheffield, you know. You know, so we were all born in Sheffield, you know, and that's how we came. And it's that, we don't have that risk-taking, I think, in some ways. And sometimes we try and conform into a space that actually doesn't exist.
I agree. I agree, and I think the Somali community now is even more conforming than it's ever been. Yeah. And but what does that achieve?
Nothing.
What does it achieve? Because either people live double lives where they conform on the surface and then do other things behind the scenes, or they're forced out and are made to feel unwelcome. But these are our forebears. You know, my grandmother eloped at the age of 17 and, you know, did everything her family said not to do, and then went off to Aden by herself in her early 20s. My father was the same. You know, that's my heritage.
Yes, yeah.
It's not being told what to do by a community that's just, you know, concerned about what the neighbours might be saying. I think that's a very small way of living.
Absolutely. And in fact, your work has shown that you don't conform. And if anything, did you find similarities between yourself and Mahmoud? Did you relate to him, actually?
Yes, I did. I did.
Yeah.
I can see why he really struggled against the rules that he was living under. He took his pride seriously. He took his freedom very seriously. He was soft. I think, you know, he had a lot of love for his children and for his wife. He was someone who gambled, and I think, you know, from the age of, he must have left Africa even, or he left Somaliland when he was in his early teens, and then traveled all the way through, picked up different languages, Swahili, Hindi, Arabic, until he ended up in Cardiff. So I love that. I love his sense of adventure, his ability to tell the police to their faces, you're liars, you know, you're racists. Yeah. In the 1950s.
Which is no small feat.
That says a lot.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
Says a lot. And that's one of the reasons, you know, other Somali men committed murders with much greater proof against them, and they were not executed. Right. But he was executed on very flimsy evidence, and it's because he was so resistant to their
But
authority.
they perceive it as defiant, maybe.
Defiant,
yeah.
cheeky,
yeah.
whatever they called it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was all unacceptable,
yeah.
all threatening to them.
Just the last question from me, actually, before we open up to the floor. So if you've got any questions, think of them now. So tell us about the title, The Fortune Men. Where did that title come from?
So this novel has had lots of different titles, and this one came quite late. But it's a phrase that was used in my father's generation and before to describe the sailors who'd gone to join the merchant navies. And it has two meanings. It means the men who've gone to search for their fortune, as in the money that they want to earn. But then also people who've put their hands they've put their fates in the hands of fortune. They don't know where they will end up. They might never be seen again. They might drown in a shipwreck. They might end up in New York or Cardiff or Hong Kong. Yeah. Who knows? But they're men of fortune who belong to fortune.
Yeah. And they're prepared to gamble.
Yeah.
They took the risk, didn't they?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because most of them would leave Somalia, Somaliland, and not even know where Europe was. Yeah. They'd just be told it's over there somewhere. Yeah.
Go that way.
Yeah, and they'd keep going.
Yeah.
And they'd keep going. And
wow.
there's a real
bravery.
Courage, to that.
I agree.
Recklessness as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's been so lovely talking to you, Nadif. It really has, but I would like to include the audience in this conversation as well. So if you do have any questions, I believe there is a roving microphone. Correct, at the top. Thank you, Jenna. So if anybody has any questions, please do raise your hand, and we can direct them at Nadif. But we have about 10 minutes for this section, if that's okay. I see a hand down here. Thank you.
Hi there, hello. I wanted to ask, as a female writer, what your approach was to writing a male protagonist, and especially someone who actually kind of existed in real life.
Thank you. I'd written about my father in my first novel, Black Mamba Boy, so I'd had some experience of it. And with my father, you know, he was right there, and he was a man who was raised by his mother, and then who had raised me, so there was a kind of line, a similarity between all of us that made that line between feminine and masculine not so blunt or clear. But then Mahmoud is someone I've had to research and who's not there to tell me his opinion on things. So in a way, I gave him more freedom than I'd given my father, because I think with my father, there's a boundary for both of us that, you know, you don't want to go too far into their private life or other things. But with Mahmoud, I thought he was the kind of person who gambled. You know, many of them gambled. It was their way of life. Or, you know, if he drank, he drank. I wasn't there to kind of preserve an impression of him. He was a petty thief who was convicted of stealing money from the mosque. Fine, you know, that's it. I'm not going to whitewash or make you into someone you were not. But it was also about having empathy for him, So even when I can imagine him being angry with his wife because she's separated from him and he wants to get back together, you know, you imagine that his feelings are not settled. One minute he's angry, the next minute he's like, oh, I love her, then he's angry again. So he's young, he's a man of that time, but it's also a question of what was said about him. So Laura, his wife, said that he had never hit her, which was very unusual for that period of time. It was seen as a normal thing for a man to beat his wife. But that wasn't him. And he helped in the kitchen and things like this. There were these contradictions that made him even more interesting.
Thank you. Next question over here. Thank you. Gentleman in the black jacket.
Assalamu alaikum. So we're now embarking on an era where Somali films are being made, obviously with the recent success of Gravedigger's Wife. I think that deserves our applause. Burkina Faso Award. Yeah, come on. We have to praise him. And obviously Daliero. Do you see stories such as this being turned into films or adaptations of films later on?
I hope so.
I hope so too.
Yeah, I might have news on that soon, but I can't announce anything yet.
Do we have any more questions from the floor? There's a hand over here. Right over here, sorry.
Well.
There's one there.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, since it was kind of like hard depicting the life of someone that lived so like many years ago, how did you find the journey of like collating different like information about the character himself, like interviewing people? How did you find that?
I love it. I think I wouldn't write if I couldn't do that. So with this story in particular, it was a British story. It happened in Britain. So you have the archives, which I've never had before. And by chance, this case file was open earlier than it should have been. Normally, if there's a murder trial, it's not released until 70 years after the event to protect the people that might be involved. But this Mahmoud Matan's case was open already by the time I'd gone to the archives to look for it. And it was incredible. It's a few hundred pages describing everything, receipts, from the moment he's arrested, the interviews then, to the court and the appeals process. So it's a real luxury to have that. It's one of the things that I'm sad about when I'm writing stories set in Somalia or Somaliland, is that you don't have that. You have oral histories, and that's why I've always conducted interviews with people, but you don't have this factual, historical record, which I always think is not so factual.
I was going to ask, actually, is that a reference, or do you have to interpret that slightly as well, take things with a pinch of salt sometimes?
You do, because you always have to remember, when I read the case file, I thought, oh, he was guilty, because it's so convincing. Right. But it was a lie. Yeah. You know, they framed him, and the framing, you know, the fiction of his guilt is what they've preserved in the archives. So you have to be aware of that. And then I did lots of interviews with people, old Somali sailors in London, in Cardiff, in Somaliland. And yeah, even now, I'm still not over-researching it. I feel I could quite happily read more about it. As the years went on and I was researching, I started to feel like maybe I can solve the murder and find out who really did kill Lily Volpert.
Is there enough information to do that, you think?
There was one interview conducted in Cardiff with a Somali sailor who moved to London, and he said he knew the guy who had been the last man in the shop. And he knew that he was the last man in the shop and was panicked that the police were looking for him. And he ran away, first of all, to Manchester, and then he ran away to Brazil. So I think
you mentioned that in the book, don't you?
I do, yeah. So I don't have any proof, and the man is long dead, but I think it was him.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nadia. No proof, but it was him.
I know.
Any more questions from the floor? We have a hand here in the middle, on the left. Thank you. And then we'll take the gentleman at the back as well.
Thank you. Hi, Navifa. Thank you so much for writing this book. It's a story that my mother used to tell me when I was young, and it was one of those stories that was sort of hidden in the shadows. We didn't know what really happened, but we know that Mahmoud Matan was convicted, and he wasn't guilty, but later vindicated. I just had a question about something that struck me in the book, which was about Mahmoud Matan's mother. When he starts to repent in the jail, he thinks a lot about his mother, and he's also, for a long time, he avoided calling his mother when he came here as a seaman. And I just wondered what made you connect the two. I think a lot of us can connect with the fact that our mothers, nag us a lot of the time sometimes, and no disrespect or anything, but in the book, I got the feeling that he was running away from his mother for a while, and then at his lowest point, he was remembering her quite a lot. So I just wondered, what was the inspiration behind that? Was it based on something that happened in his life, or was that part of the fiction of the book? Yeah, thank you.
I think it's one of those things that I don't have a clear answer for. I was thinking about my own father and his relationship with his mother, and how it was very elastic. Even from a very young age, he was away from her. But then when he needed her, she would appear and fix things. And with Mahmoud's, I think all of the men of that generation, there was such a high level of child mortality that the few children that survived, you might have 12 children and only 3 of them survive. The intensity of the mother's feeling for the ones that survived is so intense that it can be suffocating, it can be overwhelming, and therefore drive them away. And Mahmoud had grown up in a much more comfortable situation than my father did. And probably that led to him even wanting to experience life on his own even more, because he knew that he could have that to fall back on. So I always imagined him as someone who felt guilty about this mother who was out there, who loved him so much. And it's only when he starts to feel very vulnerable that he wants that protection again. And it's not suffocating then, it's exactly what he needs and wants, is to be known, to be understood, to have someone who cares for him and cares for his flesh. It's his flesh that's in danger in that prison.
During that calling out for his mother, it reminded me of George Floyd. When in his dying moments he was calling for his mother, and it's like the last thoughts that come into people's mind when they are up against the wall is, irrespective of that relationship, your mother comes to your mind.
You return to being a child. It's so horrific.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that question. Any more questions? There's a hand at the back. Thank you.
Good evening. I wanted to find out from you, why this protagonist and why this story? You mentioned, in answering the other questions, you wrote your first book and the protagonist was your father. So in this book, why this specific story? Why did you choose this protagonist? And then what were your hopes? Because you mentioned it took you years to research. What did you hope to achieve in doing this book and telling the story? And do you feel you've achieved it?
It's a good question.
I don't think I chose this story. It chose me. It was the first creative idea I ever had in 2004. I wanted to turn it into a film, and that film became a novel about my father, and then there was another novel, and then I was trying to write a third novel separate to this when this novel just said, no, it's time to write me. And it got under my skin very early on. Why? Because it's important. It's the first ever miscarriage of justice overturned in a British court. And the fact that it involved a Somali sailor that my father knew, and it was his young, working class Welsh wife who got that conviction overturned almost 50 years later, that's powerful. That's the stuff that you don't forget. Mahmoud as well, the more I learned about him, the more fascinating he became to me. He wasn't a simple character. He was complicated, and he was someone, I think, very modern who paved the way in many ways for the way that we live now. I think that was true of the whole Tiger Bay area, is that it was bringing something new to this country that would eventually become the norm. You have a mosque, you have a madrasa, you have a kosher abattoir, you have a Greek shop and a Spanish restaurant. You had all of that in Tiger Bay from the 19th century onwards. So it felt as if it was something I had to do. And am I satisfied with the novel? Pretty much, yeah.
I think we're going to take one or two more questions. There's a gentleman at the hat. Sorry, where's the microphone?
And here as well.
Do you want to take the question? Would you like to take the question at the front? Is there a microphone down here at the front row, please? Thank you. And then we'll take the gentleman at the hat at the back as well. Thank you.
In researching fortune men generally, looking at these young men that had left home earlier than normal and travelled around the world, to what extent did you feel they had a different culture in the end, and how did that differ to those men if they stayed at home? I mean, if you're born and stay in Somalia, the culture of storytelling, or the oral culture, poetry, some of those things are sort of permanent and will never disappear. But when you start travelling away from that influence, and you start picking up a bit of Hindi and a bit of Arabic and looking at the world in a different way, did you feel that the fortune men had a sort of synthetic fused world culture, or were they hankering to go back to Somalia in a way to try and catch up with what they'd lost? How did you feel about that?
I think it varied a lot. So certain things they brought with them, and you know, the book was actually 600 pages before I edited it, so there was a lot I took out, and some of that was to do with the culture, the society that they built here. Some of them were very active politically against, you know, in anti-colonial struggles, or they were communists or trade unionists. So they were doing all of that, and that was another reason that the police were suspicious of Somalis or Muslims or other black communities. Special branch would often follow them around and try and do what they knew now, do what they do now, where they try and penetrate these organizations to break them up. But I think, yeah, they had poetry, they would compete in poetry, but the aspects of the culture that they picked up here, whether that was gambling, drinking, dances, vices of different types, there were some that would live both lives, would try and live a traditional and religious life and also have this life. And there was tension between people for the choices they made, and Mahmoud was drifting further and further away from the Somali community. Not to the point where they disowned him, and when he was in trouble, they were the ones who paid for his lawyers, barristers, solicitors. They paid for everything, despite having very little money themselves. So some of them did hanker after Somalia, Somaliland, and they returned, or they had their families there, and then they would try and split their time between here and there. But others, I think, married British women and left that part of their life behind.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take a question from the gentleman at the back, and then the very last question to the lady at the front. Thank you.
Hi, Nadifa. This story is so intriguing, and the character itself he's kind of mythical to start off with before you even start writing the novel. So from the writer's perspective, when you're sitting and writing about a real-life person like that who's already surrounded, and there's somewhat degree of mystery about him, and adding another layer of fictionalizing it, when you sit with that idea as a writer, does it feel like you have further mythologized the person, or you've brought it closer to the truth? Are we closer to the truth in your view, having written this book, or are we more deeper into the mystery of what this character is? And how does that sit also ethically in terms of if someone is truly searching for the truth, was this the way to go about doing that?
In contrast to nonfiction? Yeah. I don't think nonfiction is the truth. I don't think the truth exists in a concrete way. Once something has happened, everyone remembers it differently. My father did remember Mahmoud, but he just remembered him as an ordinary man. Nothing's particular about him, while Olabisi Ocean, who was a Nigerian watchmaker that had a fight with Mahmoud in Cardiff, when I met him a few years ago, he said Mahmoud was a crazy man, who looked really good. You know, he did say he looked really good, but he was a crazy man at the same time. So, and then Laura, his wife, would see one side of him. His children would see a different side of him. There's no one who can say they have the truth about him. The police turned him into this kind of almost monstrous figure. And it was strange that the chief detective who had really been responsible for framing him for years afterwards was the one who told Mahmoud's story. He said that Mahmoud was, you know, this panther prowling through Tiger Bay, you know, desperate to rob some money so he could go gambling. The kind of person that, you know, should send shivers down your spine. So he concocted a completely different version that was, you know, going along with racist ideas of that time. But I don't think a non-fiction, if I had written this as pure non-fiction, I would have lost him, because all I would have had to go on is the archives, and the archives don't tell the truth about what happened to him. So sometimes fiction is the way of actually reaching out and communing with someone. I felt that's what I was trying to do all the time, was trying to hear him, trying to feel him, trying to feel what he felt, trying to at least bear witness to what he experienced.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And your very last question at the front row. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for writing this book. Like you said, it's incredibly important, and it comes through, the communing with him really comes through, because you've made him into this three-dimensional human that he was, and that would have been so lost in any other way. And I guess my question is, the victim's surname is different in the story, and I wanted to ask how much of your research involved their descendants, given that the daughter and the niece and the sister of the victim both said in court that he was not the man.
Yeah.
And you'd think the only two people who'd seen the guy would be the witnesses that
would matter.
But obviously that injustice is injustice. So how much of that, how much of them did you bring into the book?
They became a bigger and bigger part of the novel, so I changed the surname because of the request of one of the family members. And it was actually quite useful to do that, because it gave me a distance on the real characters, because I had less information about them. I had more than I expected, but I had less than I did on Mahmoud, for example. So it was my imagination stepping in and, you know, piecing bits of their real histories with my own fiction. But I was intrigued by them. You know, they were earlier immigrants. Their father had arrived in 1905 from Poland, Russia. They were now respectable immigrants, unlike Mahmoud, who was a very, you know, unrespectable immigrant. But they showed strength in not going along with what the police wanted them to do, which was to say this man is the guilty party. To stick to that, I think, with all of that pressure, would have been very hard. Yeah, and it was also interesting. I think that history of Black British and Jewish British history is much more intertwined than we realise. The fact that in East London, in all of the docks and port towns that the Somalis lived, there was also a strong Jewish population. And often it was the Jewish population who would give housing to black immigrants. So that was an interesting connection for me. And also the fact that you have women living alone in the 1950s, who one is widowed, one was never married, one is a child, and how they also tried to build a different kind of life to the husband, wife, 2 kids model that was held up as the ideal one at that time.
Thank you so much. And I will end on a question. 2 questions, actually. I think you inspire questions, I think is what we're discovering today. I suppose there's 2 things. What advice would you give for any aspiring writers here in the audience today? And what are the key messages that you think the readers should take away from your book? Messages? What would you like people to take away from the book after they've read it?
I guess the message is probably be careful of falling into fictions. One thing that I've realized recently when there's been all of these horrible crimes against women is how eager we are to see someone locked up. Yeah. We're eager to put a face to the evil and to have that face taken out of society, pushed away. And once that feeling is excited or incited in us, that's where the injustice happens. Sure. Because we just want that feeling gone. We want the feeling of threat gone.
A bit of closure.
Yeah. And that's what happened to Mahmoud. So I think we should all think harder about who we stigmatize, who are willing to believe the worst about, and the power relationships between us and other people. Sure. Mahmoud was executed partly because he was a black Muslim immigrant young man here, but then in other parts of the world it happens for different reasons, for clan or for religion or for other things, other motivations, and we should be just as condemning of that as we are of this. Any other messages? I think...
Do you know what I took away from your book as well was live the life you want to live. I think that's something that Mahmoud, good or bad, how he ended was sort of irrespective. He lived in a way that he chose on his own terms.
I think that's true.
On his own terms.
Yeah, and yeah, life can be taken away from you
at any moment.
Yeah, and if you've lived your life on your own terms, that's one less thing to regret.
Absolutely. And on that note, we're going to close on that really salient message. We will close our interview with Nadifa. I want to thank you very much, Nadifa.
Thank you.
Please do a round of applause. And we wish her all the very, very best for her on Wednesday for the Booker Prize award ceremony. And we have some flowers that Kate have prepared on behalf, just to wish you well on that as well.
Thank you again. Thank you.
Nadifa.
Yeah. Thank you. Take a seat. Take a seat. Thank you so much. That was a really, really enriching and interesting conversation. Thank you so much for your time, Nadifa. It was lovely. We are now going to move on to the next part of the evening. Time waits for no man. It's now shifting along. So I'm going to call to the stage we have the honour to have our Minister for Africa present with us today, Vicky. I'm going to ask her to come to the stage. She is a new Minister for Africa, and this is her first UK, her first event, public event. So please do come along. Thank you so much. I'll leave my stuff here. Is that okay?
Thank you so much, Fatima. And thank you for this incredibly warm welcome tonight. I hope I get this right. Haben Wanagsan. It is a real joy for me to join your rich and vibrant celebration of Somali arts and culture, and wonderful to see the return of the festival. And just before Nadifa goes, really, really, really good luck. How amazing to have a Booker Prize finalist. And it's just a real sign of how incredibly strong your contribution and all of your contribution are to arts and culture. It's really good luck on Wednesday. You know, the pandemic has been really hard for all of us, and I'd like to just take a moment to recognise the losses within the British Somali community, including Hudaydi, the King of Oud, who I know has been prominent at this festival in years past. We in the UK absolutely share in the desire of so many of you for Somalia and the region to be a place of peace and prosperity. It's good for Somalia, it's good for the region, it's good for the world, and it's good for the UK. And the UK is committed to helping to build that peace and prosperity and democracy in the Horn of Africa. We're one of the leading countries in the world working to advance democracy and stability in Somalia and across the region. We're working towards the delivery of peaceful elections in Somalia. We're one of the country's largest donors. We've recently strengthened our presence in the region by opening a new embassy in Djibouti, and we're promoting prosperity through our investment in the development of the Berbera Corridor to ease trade and facilitate the creation of jobs across the region. And the arts also has a really important place to play in breaking down barriers between communities and promoting democracy. So we continue to fund initiatives that foster talent across the region. Since 2016, we've provided fully funded master's degrees places in the UK for more than 60 up-and-coming Somali leaders through our Achieving scheme, and that helps those future leaders to come here to the UK to study for those degrees at our universities before then returning back home. We're funding global initiatives that are helping Somalis access COVID-19 vaccines and to adapt to the impacts of climate change. We've recently trained Somali journalists to report on the impacts of climate change in Somalia. And it's incredibly important that those stories are shared, particularly as we're now just a few days away from when the world leaders will be gathering together for COP26 next week in Glasgow. And we're really looking forward to welcoming Somali representatives to that conference. The Somali community here makes a really important contribution to our society, as well as helping to build bridges between the UK and the Somali-speaking Horn. And the contribution of the British Somali community has continued to win acclaim on the domestic and international stage. I was so moved to just listen to that interview of Nadifa. And it was a really, really powerful story that she is telling, not only to all of us in this room tonight, but also to the rest of the world through that shortlisting for her prize. I'd also like to say huge congratulations to the 3 times Paralympic bronze medalist, Abdi Jama, for his amazing performances in Tokyo. I think somebody's recording this, so I'm just sending you massive congratulations for that, Abdi. It's a real shame you're not here tonight, but just keep playing basketball. I'm utterly delighted to be here to celebrate with you tonight. I want to enjoy this wonderful showcase with you of all the talents of the Somali community in the UK. All the very best for your festival, and please have so much fun and celebrate hard in the week ahead, as you've got so much to be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister, for those very kind words. We accept your congratulations heartily, and we also send back a message to you that as a community, we hope that we're seen, by the government. We are a community. We are the oldest African community in this country, and yet we are quite vulnerable, and particularly at the moment. So I would ask that we are seen, that we are remembered, and that we are acknowledged, and hopefully our needs are met. So that's an easy thing. Super. Thank you. We'll also give you some flowers today. My apologies. I am.
Victoria, we want to surprise a friend of ours who is your staff, who just finished his term in Hargeisa. So do you mind giving this flower to Stuart Brown?
Absolutely. Flowers. Ready to
So these flowers are for Stuart.
I'm sure Stuart is embarrassed. It was a surprise. but Stuart has been working with us and supporting us for the last 3 years with art and culture, both in Hargeisa International Book Fair and here. And really, we want to say to you, thank you on behalf of all artists that you have been supporting. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you. And what we find is that when we establish relationships with people in the Somali region, they tend to stay long-term friends. So we hope to see you very much in the future. Thank you, Stuart. We'll move on now. We'll move on to our poetry recital. We have a treat in store. We do have 3 young and upcoming amazing poets who are going to share some of their work with us tonight. They are carrying on that lineage of poetry that we all have in our DNA as the Somali people. And I'm going to invite to the stage, first of all, we're going to start with Sagal Farah. I'll just introduce her. Sagal is a published London-based poet, and she's had her work appear in numerous global exhibitions. She is a 2021 Roundhouse Poetry Slam finalist, no less, and has performed at award ceremonies, theatres, and at the Mayor's City Hall as well. She aims to create social awareness through her poems and writes about issues such as belonging, social justice, and immigration. Please join me and give a roaring welcome to Sagal Farah.
Hi everyone, Assalamu alaikum. So my first poem I wrote quite recently, and I wrote it on my way back home from a poetry event. And as I was walking home, I was looking at sites like the London Eye and the Shard and the River Thames, and it just had me thinking about what it means to be a Londoner and what my place is in this city. So this poem is called Love Letter to London. Sometimes I love this city. I love the way it smiles at me, and I love the way it curses me. I love that I can't tell the difference sometimes. I love that we're the city that never sleeps, yet most of the tubes end at midnight. I love my Cinderella moments. I love that we all suddenly become weathermen when speaking to strangers. I love the football hooligans chanting, England. I love their unwavering faith in it coming home. I love that we think each season will be different. I love that a ball can cause both a coronation and a revolution. I love that you love me when I've won a marathon or discovered the cure for cancer or won a Nobel Peace Prize. I love that you claim my success as your own and my failure as my mother's. I love that we wear white to weddings and we wear black to funerals. I love that I am the color of your grief. I love that we all cram on the central line closer than strangers ought to be, yet we still won't make eye contact, and we still won't get up for the pregnant woman, and we make pregnant women wear badges as if their body isn't loud enough. I love that our neighbors are faces and never names. Speaking of names, I love that you know you can't say my name, yet still you do it so confidently. I love that you make me think that I'm the one mispronouncing my own name. I love that you want me, that you want me to go blonde and listen to jazz and lose my tan and be a man. I love that you want to try. I love that you want 3 of me's in your office. Maximum 15%. 20 if we're pushing it. I love that you want my face in your spaces, but never my soul. I love that we wear our masks under our nose. I love that you want the chai, but not the chai wala. I love the Karens. Shout out to the Karens, their straight cut, blonde, bedazzled crown, the way they look me up and down, the way they want to spit me out, the way they want to have a row, the way they love, the way they sound, the way they summon managers out of their hats like clowns. Sometimes I love this city. The way it brings me up, the way it tears me down, the way a cradle can feel like 6 feet underground, the way we're all just lost and waiting to be found. Thank you. So my next poem is called Chasing the Sun. We roll our R's and bend our tongues. We squeeze as many flags into the core of us was blue and white, just not enough. Each winter taunts and taints our blood. Lido Beach laughs as snowflakes freeze our lungs. When we return, the water rejects our love. We puke it out, we fear home's touch. You apologize in Gabe. Say you were only chasing the sun, but soon all you knew was how to run and run and run. You say you were only chasing the sun. You were young and having fun, but you left frankincense and camel milk for bedrooms and kitchens, for stairs and guns, for souls in mud. Can this land ever really be for us? You swear you never meant to leave, yet you haven't been back once. Africa is home, was home. But it never was enough. It gave you your tongue, your hair, your heart, but you wouldn't let it give you its love. You say the bombs kept you up at night, that coming here was a must, but these days your mirror reflects a foreign sight. You no longer know what to trust. You hide each bit of culture as your way to survive, but now you're broken, tongueless. Now you're lost. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sagal. That was really touching poetry. Thank you so much for that. We're now going to invite to the stage our next poet. I'm going to invite Farah Gabdon. Farah is a storyteller, spoken word, poetry, and an English teacher by day. She self-published her first collection of poetry, Breathing Just a Little, in 2016. She's performed her spoken word poetry internationally. She's going to recite today 2 poems, one by the name of To All My Children, and another one called Woman. Both are letters. The first one is a letter from our mothers to ourselves, and the second is a letter from her to her daughter. Please join me in welcoming Farah to the stage as well. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, guys. In the spirit of inspired by the past and inspiring the future, I've brought 2 poems with me today. The first poem is called To All My Children. It's a poem it's basically a letter that our mothers would have written to us if they were able to. It's the conversation that happens in all of our homes. It's been happening in our homes, and I'm hoping it will be a conversation of the past. To all my children, if you could see me now, English dictionary in hand, trying to write you this letter, trying to understand this language better so we could communicate, you would never believe it. For 20 years, I have refused to learn this language, to immerse myself into this culture. I have gone to Esau lessons and sat defiant, applying henna to my hands, living in the dream that soon we'll go back to our land and this will all just be so far away. But now I fear the gap between us is too wide. When I speak to you in Somali and you reply in English, it's a reminder of how far apart we really are and how much the cultures that raised us have taken from us, how much I do not know of you and how much you do not know of me. I've watched you grow into a culture I do not know, a life I do not understand. I've walked you to schools and playgrounds, seen the joy in your face as you played Ringa Ringa Roses and smiled into the face of a woman as white as the sheets you slept on. I have known pain in this life, but I have never been hurt more than in that instance, as if whiter skin meant more warmth. I watched you reach for her and I spent my days muttering silent prayers, oh Allah, bring them back to me. You see, I have loved you. Perhaps not how you think I should have done. Perhaps I should have spoilt you with toys, filled you full of sweets and let you run the streets. But I have loved you the only way I know how to, the only way I was taught, through prayers, tears and laughter as heavy as the rain of my once upon a time. I've laughed with you at how my R's roll too thick off my tongue and how my remember always sounds like remember, how I say Birkenham instead of Birmingham, and remember how you cried with me when fireworks on Guy Fawkes brought back the memories of how my Uncle Ali died, how I watched, how I heard the shots, how I held him after and I prayed through ragged breaths, dear God, just let him breathe, let him breathe. I have cried for you the same way, afraid that every death reported while you were out after Maghrib is yours. I wish that I could make you understand. I'm afraid this land that kept you safe from mortars will kill you for your mobile phone. I've shouted from rooftops, screamed through gunshots and run with shrapnel in my spine, carrying you on my back to bring you here, England, this land that promised safety, this land that you call home, this place that taught you things I did not know and told you that I could never understand, that what made sense to you could never make sense to me, as though we had never known love back home. But you are proof that we loved, that we danced and dreamed, that your father lay me on my back and we conspired to create you. But you feel less like mine and more like hers these days. London feeds you now and clothes you. I'm afraid that one of these days she will swallow you. Thank you. The second poem is looking forward into the future, and it's the letter that I would read to my daughter, and it's called, this poem is All Women. What I will tell my daughter. Someday, you will be told that a woman's gaze must never stretch as far as a man's, that his should soar above the seventh heaven like shooting stars between planets to find himself on Saturn's rings, but yours must never exceed the ceiling of your house because you were made different. Your place lies in the cleanliness of kitchen shelves, the dust between radiator and wall, the stains on both carpet and floor because you are a woman, nothing more. But this poem is called Woman, called mother and wife, called daughter. It is wombs stretching, filled with pain and love, lungs pumping life into new body and soul, ribs expanding, housing, caring, creating. This poem is all woman. It is hearts breaking, aching for both infant and man. It is tender, patient, loving, forever understanding, never relenting, and always, always, always real. This poem is all woman, all you. The night you are born, I will take you to see the moon, full and bright, its reflection filling the tiny pupils of your eyes, and your father and I will argue about whether to call you Shamsa after the sun or Qamar after the moon. Your 13th birthday is when I will read you this. Before periods and heartbreak and boys, you will be as tall as me, your breasts emerging, hips curving and lips stained pink because you are learning that being beautiful is more important to the world than being real. That everything you do would only ever be labeled as not bad for a girl, and that in some places having a daughter still brings shame on families. But this poem is called Woman, is all woman, all you. This poem is a reminder of what it means to descend from a line of women with a strength found only in martyrs who set themselves on fire to save their kin. This poem is all heart. It is to remind you that you share blood with women who march with shrapnel in their thighs but fall to their knees the moment their grandchild cries. The same women who carry more strength in the arthritic wobble of their knees than humanly possible. This poem is because you are one half of life, one half of body and soul. This poem is because you are a moon, and you must never forget that you possess in you the strength to shine when enveloped in darkness, to smile when drowning in pain. You see, they might say that a woman's gaze must never stretch as far as a man's. No, yours must stretch further because you are a woman, nothing less. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farah, and thank you to Sagar as well. Really powerful, powerful poetry. You took me to a different place, I have to say. Thank you so much. And we will now introduce our very final poet, to come to the stage. This poet is Ibrahim Hirsi. He's a student, writer, peer researcher for the Centre for Mental Health. He's a digital Somali cultural archivist, independent researcher. His writings explore changes in Somali culture from colonialism to now. His work has appeared in PBLJ. He has worked as a consultant on Asmat Jamat's interactive short film, Before We Disappear. He'll be reading two poems tonight, one by the name of Guban, and this poem explores the relationship between the nomadic pastoral way of life and faith, and a second poem called Fisherman's Song. Please join me in welcoming Ibrahim to the stage. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Setting. أو بنادن كعاجسن سوغانتا لو جوي بانين سو وضع المتكي كواد وحالي هذا جوبان I don't know why I started Somali, the poem's in English. But yeah, so I'm really fascinated why the Somalis in the situation we're in right now, and not just about like the changes that have happened over the past 30 years that have brought us here, but and not even the past 53 years, but you know, the past 100, 200, 300 years. And this first poem, I had read a couple gabbays by a guy called Salan Arabi, who's this amazing poet. And I had seen the way they talks about faith in one side and clan conflict in the other. And I was just so fascinated by this relationship that nomads have. There's an epigraph at the start. It's a line from a gabbay by a guy called Abu Qorane, and he says, "Gulama roban arka guban kaso horie," which means I see heavy grey clouds releasing rain moving from the burnt plains. Guban means both burnt, and it's also the name of these plains that are between Sela and Berbera. And so, yeah, this is how it goes. Guban, the burnt plains, slick with a salty lust. I have a multitude of proverbs, each saying the same thing, each torn from the same rib. Grief is not grief until land is associated with it. Salan Arabi knew loss intimately, felt its weeping tendrils on his psyche. Was it so hard he landed headfirst into prayer and an elastic band religiosity? He had a pastoral tone, pastoralist's tone, waged war with cousins, left the greenery of Togder rusty with blood, and became bloated with the milk of others. But Addi's message crippled him, left him bowed in reverence, kneecapped and rolled him into doughy sincerity in a way only sorrow can. 60 years later, and hammer twists and calcifies into a shell, turns rock of sugar in water, burps out a carbonated anguish. People say it was the inhabitants' sin that did it, that left the country rotting like the roots of a tooth. I guess people need to get others to believe. Let them become excuses for belief. I guess people need to believe the rotting flesh stench of their torment was not in vain. God, do not make us tools of their cleansing. Do not make us vultures for their melancholy. Yeah, that's the first one. The second poem is called A Fisherman's Song. And I wrote this actually a year ago, but it's basically about like the sea, the Somali Sea. And I think it's quite apt seeing what's happened recently. And it basically goes through how it's basically been a site, it's been a site of major contention, a site of grief and nourishment, and a place that both injures us and we have injured it. Yeah, in this poem, there's a kind of like chorus kind of bit, which is from a traditional fisherman's song in Somali. I'll translate as well, there's only 3 lines. Yeah. A fisherman's song. They came in waves, tore through hull, through metal wire. Nothing tastes like it. Ruined fish, toxic waste and salt. Hunger will push you, the kind that starts from your legs, has you standing, walking, jittering until you wither from the top down. It'll propel you, last ditch, an emergency protocol. alla mayr ma tagin miyana uma bixin oo marantidayda lama soo ballamin alla maa la'aan wuxuu meerayaa. Oh God, I have not gone to maid nor the nomadic interior, and I have not made plans to meet with my wife. Oh God, look how he roams wealthless. That bombing did something to us, that near-death British fire. The men sick with malaria and love who left us, they also did something to us. The boats that glide in the morn return with song, tired, with unmade promises on their chests, they also did something to us. When the Haji, the winged one, the dervish remnant, left nothing but poems on old age, that did something to us. When they came with ships, left Bara where shell of whitewashed carcass, Sailor, a citywide resting place, did that do something to us? When they came with ships, left Ale, all our seasides, nuclear, did that not do something to us? Allah mayr ma tagin, miyan uma bixin, oo marantidayda lama soo ballamin, Allah maa la'aan wuxuu meerayaa. Oh God, I have not gone to maid, nor the nomadic interior, and I have not made plans to meet with my wife. Oh God, look how he roams, wealthless. 90s, the decade that made us dance for it, stapled our faces, a sloping grin belied by eyebrows. They are not stewards, willful failures. It will not be how it is now were it not for them. They have no liver. God, do you not know how important it is, the liver? They have no chest, no mir. Take up space like starvation, like milk in the belly, like darkness in an eclipse, ever expanding. What is the difference between a man who breaks a promise and a man who refused to make one? Elaine, they both leave people waiting, things in patience, wives in wilderness. Faith, I guess. Do they not know grief is for our bellies? You cannot write an elegy hungry. Allah mayr ma tagin, miyan uma bixin, oo marantidayda lama soo ballamin, Allah maa la'aan wuxuu meerayaa. Oh God, I have not gone to maid, nor the nomadic interior, and I have not made plans to meet with my wife. Oh God, look how he roams, wealthless. Did they not read about us before they returned in their funny masks, their weak disguises? We know how to defend. A nomad knows there's nothing worse than hunger. A fisherman knows there's nothing worse than an empty catch. Fish turn slick with oil, track poison onto shore. Goliath fills his belly with the vestige. I will not berate my people standing for what is theirs. I will not say to them patience and faith anymore. I will have shame. Allah mayr ma tagin, miyana uma bixin, oo marantidayda lama soo ballamin. Allah maa la'aan wuxuu meerayaa. Oh God, I have not gone to maid, nor the nomadic interior, and I have not made plans to meet with my wife. Oh God, look how he roams, wealthless. When you resort them to weigh their bellies with stone, to rub cotton on their teeth, to lips brine, remnants of millet, do not be surprised when they rise like metropolises and cover the sky, open the sea and earth, and leave the whole world witnesses. A fisherman's song is nothing if not a drought of the back brain, a prospering of his subconscious, an age-old adage, something dormant, a warning, a war song. Allah ma la'an wuxuu meerayaa. Oh God, look how he roams, wealthless. Thank you. Dhextaalkaasaan geliyay waxay ka mid ahayd heesihii badda markii kalluumaysiga la sameynayay waxyaabaha caynkaasa heesihii la qaado waa hees hidiyo dhaqan ah oo dhextaal baan ka digay maadaama gabi ugu saabsan yahay badda Soomaaliyeed.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim. That was really beautiful poetry. Really enjoyed that. Thank you to all our poets this evening. They have really shared with us some, their beautiful perspective on things. So thank you so much for sharing that with us tonight. We will move on. We are not done. I would like to welcome to the stage for some flowers. Omar. Flowers aplenty tonight. We want to... Let me just introduce Omar. Omar is the main actor for a new film, The Gravedigger's Wife. This is a film that's now been nominated for one of the best international films. It has won a Pan-African award, throwing 16 other films to the side, kicked them to the curb. So thank you so much.
Actually, in 300.
My mistake. It started off 1,300 films, and it is a feature-length film in the Somali language, which is a very unusual thing. So we'd like to present you on behalf of Heather, the director, and the team completely. All the very best for the Oscars. We hope to see you on the red carpet, and our very best wishes to you. Thank you so much, Omar. Do you want to say a few words? Welcome. You're welcome.
English kana waxaan ka aqaanaa thank you London. aad iyo aad baad mahadsantihiin kulligiin inta halkan ka soo qayb gashay. dareenkayga kama sheekayn karo, laakiin waxa weeye waxa kaloo halkan dee aan uga mahad celinayaa walaalkay Khadar inankii filimka sameeyey lahaa qoray director gareeyey isaga ma haddaasoo dhan iska leh. markaas intan aada sii turjumi doona haddaan anu Englishku wuu kala baxbaxsanayaa.
So Umar has accepted these flowers on behalf of the director, the filmmaker Khadar, who was unfortunately able to come today, but he wanted to thank everybody for their good wishes, and we hope to see them succeed in the way that we want to see Nadifa and everybody in this room who endeavours to do something that's breaking boundaries to succeed as well. So thank you very much, Umar. Okay, we are now going to move to the night's entertainment. And this is a lady who needs very, very little introduction. I have heard her sing. My mother has been singing your songs for a very, very long time. So we've heard you sing for so long. This is the very famous and renowned singer from Somalia. Her name is Nim'a Yassin. We're going to welcome her to the stage for some evening entertainment and some lovely songs tonight.
هذه تبدا وبحيسد إلى نموت دروك سنة ما هي برهي إنا صوت فرني دردار ير أنكو فرو حتى هذه تبدا وبحيسد إلى نموت دروك سنة ما هي برهي إنا صوت فرني دردار ير أنكو فرو كيو حسوس تايدون هديني 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 ددلك جعل كيو حسوس تايدون هديني 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 dayn hakaaga dhigo dawgu toobiya qoraxdu dalaalimo dadka aabiyo hooyo dayn hakaaga dhigo haddii duushadu dhaqaqado oo aynu kala durugsanaano warkagan doonaya taleefonka soo diro haddahaadi duushadu dhaqaqado oo aynu kala durugsanaano warkagan doonaya taleefonka soo diro dadalka jacaylka iyo xusuustaydun haddaynin dadalka jacaylka iyo xusuustaydun haddaynin dhowgu toobiya qoraxdu dalaalimo dadka aabiyo hooyo dayn ha kaaga dhigo dhowgu toobiya qoraxdu dalaalimo dadka aabiyo hooyo dayn ha kaaga dhigo qorax soo baxadiyo waagii beryaane ku baaqaya sanadiyo biilay naftu ku bugtaa qorax soo baxadiyo waagii beryaane ku baaqaya sanadiyo biilay naftu ku bugtaa wixii baray jacayl bulshada ogo reer biyo dhaca badidoodu maqale wixii baday jacayl bulshada ogo reer biyo dhaca badidoodu maqale inanahay besta saaxiibka badiyo ina bacaadiyo sicid boodsaaniyo weydiiba boosh inanahay besta saaxiibka badiyo ina bacaadiyo sicid boodsaaniyo weydiiba boosh boholyow nafta baahi ku qabto waxaad baanan layd od bogsin lahayd boo ku taali jidhike boholyow nafta baahi ku qabto waxaad baanan layd od bogsin lahayd boo ku taali jidhike wixii bacaadiyo asicid boodsaaniyo weydii baaboosh inanahay besta asaxiibka badiyo ina bacaadiyo asicid boodsaaniyo weydii baaboosh jiidato meel kale ki wayde ma qalbiga maxadko ka marmi waye
I think that party's going to keep going on. That's fantastic. Well, I have to say, we are now almost 9:15, and the evening is now coming to a close. So it just leaves it for me to thank everybody who's been involved in, and I have to say, I think it's taken about 2 or 3 weeks to put the entire Somali Week Festival together. So it's been a mammoth task employed by people to this minute dashing around. So please do enjoy the events on the week ahead safely. It just leaves me to thank our British Sign Language volunteers. Thank you so much for enabling our to enjoy the evening too. Thanks to our volunteers, thanks to Cade, the staff, the trustees, some of which are here today, and yourselves, the audience. This would not be an event without you here sharing the evening with us. So I will just close now and say, oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.